The story of Strata is such a great story that like, I'm itching to get out. To me, the story is even greater than the music. And the music is great, don't get me wrong, but the story of Strata is such a great story. Although Strata didn't last that long, they only had like 6 records, and they were from 1973 to 75. They had a huge impact on the city because not only just because of music, but because of what they did in terms of helping the community.
It's not just a label, it's more like a movement, I think, that had also recordings and releases.
One of the things that most people don't know is that Strata Records started the first jazz music program at Oberlin College in Oberlin, Ohio in 1970. You know, so they were about education. They wanted to educate people about music.
The music that they were playing at that time, back in the 60s, was a little bit esoteric for the general public, and they needed a place to play. So we opened our own concert gallery. It was a coffee house.
They also created their own booking agency so that the artists on the label or other artists that were affiliated or associated with the label could get booked at shows. They had their own publishing company, Synergy Publishing. They had everything in-house. So it was like an artist-run label for artists. You know what I mean? They helped out in the community whenever they could do drives or anything like that. The list goes on, you know, I mean, they had such an impact for, you know, the small amount of time that they were around. They really put a really big stamp on the city of Detroit. Even before I moved to Berlin, when I started my label in 2012, one of the first things I decided to do besides issuing on the catalog was to get a band to reimagine this catalog. Bring it to, you know, a younger audience to get them into jazz. Because, you know, jazz has this stigma now that it's kind of like for, you know, old folks, people who, you know, sip on wine and eat cheese all day. And that's just not the case, you know what I mean? So I wanted to break that stereotype by getting some producers that I respect that make popular music that the younger crowd is, you know, grooving to. When the pandemic came, that slowed my ass down, sat my ass down, and I decided to like really just, you know, formulate my plan. And then I was like, wait a minute, I know Jürgen and Alex from Jazzanova. I know that they're big time record collectors. They know Strata, they know music, you know, they're good producers, and they have the Jazzanova live band. And so when I got here, that's when I really started having the conversation with them. Well, the next step for me in terms of actually, after, you know, talking to Ali again, okay, here's my plan. He's like, oh, well, I need to introduce you to Stefan Lazaring from Jazzanova.
So Ollie told me, yeah, so Amir, he wants to do a project with the Strata music catalog with music that's been maybe not released or released already. And he wants to do something with a live band playing or replaying, reinterpreting, or I would say reimagining their catalog. And I said to Ollie, like after he told me, I was like, yeah, you did totally right. That's a great idea because it combines all the aspects of what I love about making music. So this to me sounded totally like how do you say, like a no-brainer.
He set up a meeting, we sat down, we had a good conversation, I explained my idea. And he was like, well, I'm gonna take this idea and I'm gonna talk to the other guys and see what they think. They have a moniker called The Sound of Detroit. Strata Records, The Sound of Detroit. And that's very like poignant.
It was a mixture between what you could call black music and hippie vibes and sort of pop music influences from that time, I guess. Stuff that was hip at the time.
For me, it was a great reflection of what was going on in that city at that time, like 60s, 70s. So all these kinds of flavors of music and yeah, it sounds like free people doing what they love to do, basically.
It's a bubble of urban culture, of urban black culture, but also maybe Latin and like really 70s vibe of Detroit, caught in that name, Strata. That it's not just a label.
A couple of weeks later, he came back and he was like, hey, we really like this idea. And then the next steps after that were basically, we need to draw up an agreement between ourselves. The other important thing basically is getting them the music. Okay, I was like, here's 5 of my songs that I like a lot. You choose 5 of yours, and then let's come together and figure out what those songs are gonna look like finally, and how many songs are gonna be on the album.
I remember a meeting with Stefan Leisring, Stefan Ulrich, and Christoph Adams and myself, where we just listened to the originals and just collected some ideas for grooves and feels and arrangements and just a general approach, where we were just collecting stuff.
It's not just the song, it's the whole thing. I wanted to know about the studio. I wanted to know about the instruments they had, like the musicians, they were part of the session. And that's for me was the starting point.
What first hits you is a certain atmosphere, and then you go into the detail as a listener and try to figure out what is actually going on there. What sort of sound did they use? What was the approach production-wise? And that's where you have already sort of opened that body and can start to imagine how you put your own ingredients together to make it sound as a whole. So yeah, you're looking at keyboard sounds, drum sounds, which always determine very much the overall picture that is going to evolve from what you're doing.
Unfortunately, I didn't have sheet music for any of this stuff. I even asked the owner, she wasn't able to find any. So they had to basically make the sheet music, make everything else from scratch. So that took a long process. That was basically, besides the agreement between us, that was the other really important thing.
I think it's one of the most difficult things when you work with musicians, how to get it across to different people who have completely never heard the music or not. They don't hear what you hear in your mind, so you have to get that across.
I wanted to give them different views from my band's perspective. Like Chris had 3 or 4 songs he took care of. Stefan had 3 or 4 songs he took care of, me too. And so we have like little different perspectives.
And then after that meeting, the 3 guys, Christoph and the 2 Stefans, started to do some production sketches we used for the rehearsals, where we then came up with more concrete versions or just tried out things for them to take home and think about and rearrange.
I had to be quite inventive with my rearranging these tunes, because I had 3 tunes which came quite strongly from the jazz field. Let's say then you have a active drummer here with the right cymbals and things like Elvin Jones, and a bass player doing walking bass and modal things. Something might sound like McCoy Tyner. So I had to think quite a lot how to put this in a context where we have, with a beat or something like that, to give it a bass riff. If something is modal, maybe give it a bass riff or give it a kind of groove which resembles the original or has elements of the original but has some other things.
I'm not the guy who writes out complete arrangements and give it because I'm just too lazy and also too messy in my head to just. So I gave some really messy sheets to to the guys, and they were laughing.
I knew that I wanted to have a single, and a single that had vocals, because that, being a music industry head, that a song with vocals is going to go longer. It has single potential more so than an instrumental, right? So to me, the best vocal tracks that they chose was Creative Musicians. So we got to get this right.
The story of Creative Musicians is quite interesting between Stefan and me. Like, we made a selection of which songs could we play, and I was like, no, let's not do Creative Musicians, because it's like a holy grail track to many people, and you can only do wrong. And actually also, like, when someone is saying, oh, it's too much like the original, other one saying it's so different from the original, but we just did do it our way. It's like you don't do it for other people, you do it for yourself. My thoughts were like, we should keep it danceable. Like it's about grooves and dancing.
First of all, what happened in the rehearsal was, we tried to do what Stefan, I think it was in this case, what he was arranging. He had an idea of how the drums should play.
And the groove that Stefan Leisering suggested for it is sort of a Jaki Liebezeit can kind of beat.
I know, maybe I don't have to describe it. It's Jaki Liebezeit. He has a certain type of drumming. It has also some Afro influence, but it also has something kind of German. I don't know how to explain it.
It already announced, when Can did what they did, it announced sort of an electronic approach to music where it's droney and the groove just keeps rolling. So this ingredient totally makes sense for this solution to like play live. We played everything live as a band in the studio, but still had this Can sort of steady electronic feel to it, which sort of comes from the Jazzanova side.
The moment when you prepare something on your computer and then you send it out like MP3, everyone can listen and write up. Like, you don't have to explain or write notes or something. They listen and say, okay, cool. And that moment when you hear the band play the stuff you concepted in your computer, it's always like a great moment. The
first time I heard them playing the music was like in April of last year. And I remember it because it was snowing that day. And I went into like this rehearsal space where they were at. And to be honest with you, I had no idea where they were gonna go with this. Like I was like just awake pretty much that whole week before, like just thinking like, okay, I trust them, that's why I did this with them, but I have no idea where this is gonna go. And just from the first drum roll that Jan did, I was like, okay, this is where, I didn't know this is where I wanted them to go, but this is where I want them to go. You know what I mean? It was like that kind of feeling. And I was like, all right, this is dope. I'm feeling good about this. The first rehearsals were just the rhythm section. And I'm like, this sounds great, but I'm dying to hear the vocalist. I really want to hear how he's going to work with this song, work within what the structure that they have. And I know that I paid for a horn section, so I want to know what the horn, I want to know what the horn section sounds like. Hearing the final product of it, I was like, okay. So obviously this is what true musicians are able to do. They're able to hear something that you can't hear and bring it somewhere else back around that makes sense. And that was, to me, the important difference that I felt like they brought to this record.
Now I'm here 2 years later, and it was really like one of the best projects I ever did, because it also kind of activates you in another way. You don't write own songs, you work with other people's creativity, what they wrote, and turn it into your thing, kind of like your own interpretation. Yeah.
We can't just have the story of Michael Jackson, which is a great story, or the story of Prince, great story. But there's so many other people before them and after them that have contributed to the history of music and the history of the world that need, sunshine. They need light on them. And so I feel like it's important that these stories are told and put in front of people. That's how history works. We have to know our history so that we can have a better future. I just want people to know that the story of Strata, the story of whoever it may be, is a story of all of us. And we need to pay attention to it so that we can have a better future for ourselves.